The twin suns of Kepler 442b hung low over the mining colony, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain where the Vethrani pack made their home among the human settlers. Kale was young, barely 12 cycles old by his people's count, and today was supposed to be his proudest moment as he joined the scouting division for his first real patrol beyond the safety of the colony walls. His silver-gray fur rippled in the dry wind as he followed the older scouts through the canyon paths, his golden eyes wide with excitement and his tail held high with the pride of youth. The Vethrani were a wolf-like species, tall and strong, with claws that could tear through stone and teeth that could crush bone. But they were also a people of strict laws and ancient traditions that had guided them for thousands of years. Among these laws, none was more sacred than the law of the pack. The strong survive, the weak are released, and no burden shall slow the hunt. Kale did not think about such laws as he scrambled over the red rocks, trying to keep up with the older scouts who moved with the easy grace of experience. He was thinking about how proud his mother would be when he returned, how the other cubs would look at him with respect, how he would finally be seen as more than just a pup. The ground trembled beneath his paws at first. Kale thought it was his imagination, but then the older scouts stopped and their ears flattened against their skulls in alarm. Seismic activity, growled Torvin, the patrol leader, his scarred muzzle lifting to scent the air. Everyone moved to open ground now. Kale tried to run, but the ground was already shifting and cracking beneath him, and the canyon walls on either side began to shed their skin in a cascade of red stone and ancient dust. He heard someone scream his name, maybe Torvin, maybe one of the others, but the sound was swallowed by the thunder of falling rock. Then the world became pain and darkness and the terrible weight of a mountain pressing down on his small body. When Kale opened his eyes, he could not understand why he was looking at the sky from below a pile of stone, or why his body felt like it belonged to someone else. He tried to move his legs, but they did not respond, and when he tried to breathe, his lungs filled with fire instead of air. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the red dust and making it darker, and he realized with a strange, distant horror that the blood was his own. He tried to howl for help, but only a weak whimper escaped his throat, and even that small sound sent waves of agony through his broken chest. Time passed. He did not know how much, and then he heard voices and footsteps and saw the faces of his pack looking down at him through the gaps in the rubble. "He is alive," someone said, and for one beautiful moment, Kale felt hope bloom in his chest like a flower after rain. Then he saw their eyes, and the hope died. There was no relief in those eyes, no determination to save him. There was only the cold, sad acceptance of what must be done. Pack Alpha Vorath pushed through the gathered Vethrani, his massive frame blocking out one of the suns as he leaned down to examine Kale's broken body. Vorath was old and wise and had led the pack through many hardships, and his word was law among all who bore the Vethrani name. "The spine is severed," Vorath said, his voice flat and heavy. "The lungs are filling with blood, and the legs are crushed beyond recovery." "Can the humans not help him?" asked a younger voice, and Kale recognized it as Setha, his mother, pushing forward with desperation in her golden eyes. "The humans could keep him alive," Vorath replied. "But for what purpose? He would never run again, never hunt, never serve the pack as a Vethrani should." He straightened and looked around at the gathered pack members with the weight of centuries in his gaze. "You all know the law," he continued. "A Vethrani who cannot contribute is a burden, and a burden weakens the pack. We do not prolong suffering, we grant release." Kale wanted to scream, wanted to beg, wanted to tell them that he could still be useful, that he would find a way, but his voice was trapped in his broken chest, and all he could do was watch. Vorath raised his head and opened his jaws. And from deep in his throat came the ancient howl of the rite of release, a sound that marked the soul as returned to the stars. As already dead in the eyes of the pack, one by one, the other Vethrani joined the howl, their voices rising into the darkening sky in a mournful chorus that had echoed across 100 worlds for 1,000. Generation Scale looked at his mother, pleading with his eyes for her to fight, to refuse, to do something. Anything. Sitha met his gaze for one long, terrible moment, and he saw tears streaming down her furred cheeks. Then, she closed her eyes and added her voice to the howl when the last note faded. Vorath turned away from Kale without another word, and the pack followed, one by one, until even Setha had disappeared into the growing darkness. Kale was alone. Twin suns continued their slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he had been able to feel anything other than the cold spreading through his broken body. He could still hear the distant footsteps of his pack, growing fainter with each passing moment. And he understood now what it meant to be truly abandoned, not forgotten. The pack would remember him, would speak his name in stories, would honor the cub who died bravely on his first patrol. But dead all the same, the stars began to appear overhead, cold and distant and uncaring, and Kale closed his eyes and waited for the end to come. His breathing grew shallow, each breath a battle he was slowly losing, and the pain began to fade into a strange numbness that he knew was the first step toward the final darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out, and Kale thought it sounded like a goodbye. He was 12 cycles old, and he was going to die alone in a canyon on a world far from his ancestors' home. And no one was coming to save him. That was the law, that was the way of things. That was how it had always been, and how it would always be. But Kale did not yet know that on this world, in this place, there was another species, a strange, stubborn, impossible species that had their own laws, and their laws were very, very different. The medical outpost sat 3 kilometers from the Vethrani settlement, a small collection of white buildings filled with machines that hummed and beeped and worked miracles that most species in the galaxy considered impossible. Dr. Elena Vasquez was tired, having spent the last 10 hours treating Myers with broken bones and lung infections. But she was not the kind of person who complained about being tired. She had grown up in the slums of New Manila on Earth, had fought her way through medical school on 3 different colonies, and had learned long ago that tired was just a feeling that went away if you ignored it hard enough. She was reviewing patient files on her datapad when the biosensor alert flashed. Across her screen, unknown lifeform detected. The computer announced in its calm, mechanical voice, vital signs critical. Location, Canyon Sector 7, distance, 2.3 kilometers. Elena frowned and pulled up the sensor data, her dark eyes narrowing as she studied the readings. The vital signs were Vethrani. She could tell by the dual heartbeat pattern, but they were weak and fading fast, showing the unmistakable signature of massive internal trauma. Computer, cross-reference with Vethrani settlement records. She commanded. No distress signal received from Vethrani pack. The computer replied. No rescue request logged. That was strange, because the Vethrani were careful about their people and always reported injuries so that humans would know to stay out of pack. Medical matters. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the distant canyon where the signal was coming from. Something was wrong. She activated her communicator and contacted Jorah, the Vethrani liaison officer who helped coordinate between the 2 species. Jorah, this is Dr. Vasquez at the medical outpost, she said. I am picking up critical biosigns from one of your people in Sector 7. Do you need assistance? There was a long pause before Jorah's deep voice came through the speaker. That signal is not your concern. Doctor, he said, and there was something heavy in his tone that Elena did not like. What do you mean it is not my concern? She asked, her voice sharpening. Someone is dying out there. Someone has already died. Jorah replied. The rite of release was performed this evening for a young cub injured in a rock slide. By our law, he is no longer among the living. Elena felt her stomach turn cold as she understood what Jorah was telling her. You left a child out there to die alone? We granted him the dignity of release, Jorah said. It is our way, Doctor, and I must strongly advise you not to interfere. Such an action would be seen as a grave insult to our pack and could damage relations between our peoples. Elena did not respond. She simply closed the channel and started running. Toward the vehicle bay, she did not care about politics or cultural sensitivity or the careful balance of interspecies relations that the diplomats were always talking about. A child was dying. And that was all that mattered. Sergeant Marcus Cole was playing cards with two other Marines when Elena burst into the vehicle bay. Her medical kit already slung over her shoulder. Marcus was a big man with skin the color of old oak and scars that told stories he never talked about. And he had served on 6 different worlds before being assigned to this quiet mining colony. I need a rescue team, Elena said. Now, Marcus looked up from his cards and saw the fire in her eyes, and he did not ask questions. Lopez. Tanaka, gear up, he ordered, already rising from his seat. We have got a rescue operation. 10 minutes later, they were racing across the rocky terrain in an armored transport. Elena watching the biosensor readings on her datapad as they grew weaker with each passing moment. He is fading, she said, her voice tight with urgency. We need to move faster. Any faster and we will shake ourselves apart on these rocks, Marcus replied. But he pushed the engine harder anyway. They found Cale half buried under a pile of rubble, his small body broken, and still in the fading light of the twin suns. Elena was out of the transport before it had fully stopped, her boots sending up clouds of red dust as she ran to the cub's side. He is still alive, she breathed, her fingers finding the weak pulse in his neck. Marcus, help me clear this debris, carefully. His spine is damaged. Marcus and the other Marines worked quickly but gently, lifting the heavy stones away from Cale's body while Elena stabilized his neck and prepared an emergency breathing tube when they finally pulled him free. Elena saw the full extent of his injuries and felt her heart clench with something between horror and determination. His back legs were crushed beyond recognition. His chest was caved in on one side, and his beautiful silver fur was matted with blood that had already begun to dry. Doc, he's not going to make it, Lopez said quietly. Maybe we should just... No, Elena said, her voice sharp as a blade. Get him on the stretcher, we are taking him back. Cale's eyes fluttered open as they lifted him. And Elena saw the confusion and fear in those golden depths. He tried to speak, but only a weak growl emerged, and Elena leaned close to hear him. Why? He whispered in broken common, the trade language that all species learned. Why are you here? Elena met his frightened gaze and did not look away. Because you are not dead yet, she said, and as long as you are breathing, I am not giving up on you. They raced back to the medical outpost with Cale's life hanging by a thread. And Elena began treatment in the back of the transport, injecting emergency nanobots into his bloodstream to stop the internal bleeding. Marcus carried Cale into the surgical bay himself, laying the broken cub on the operating table with a gentleness that seemed strange coming from such a large, battle-hardened man. Do what you have to do, Doc, Marcus said. We will be outside. Elena worked through the night, and into the morning she rebuilt Cale's lungs with synthetic tissue, grown in the medical fabricator, repaired his spine with experimental nanobots that cost more than most people made in a year, and reinforced his shattered bones with titanium alloy that would last longer than his natural skeleton ever could. 3 times during the surgery, his heart stopped, and 3 times Elena brought him back with electrical shocks and pure stubborn determination when her colleague, Dr. Chun, arrived for the morning shift and saw what she was doing. He stopped in the doorway with shock written across his face. "Elena, that is a Vethrani patient," he said. "Their liaison specifically told us not to." "I heard what he said," Elena replied without looking up from her work. "I did not agree with it. You are going to cause a diplomatic incident. Then I will cause a diplomatic incident," she said, her hands steady as she connected the last neural interface to Kale's new spinal column. "But I am not going to let a child die just because someone decided he was not worth saving." Dr. Chun was silent for a long moment, watching her work. "What do I tell the administrators when they ask why we use 2 years' worth of medical supplies on an unauthorized patient?" Elena finally looked up, and there was a fierce light in her tired eyes. "Tell them he is a child," she said. "Tell them that is enough." When the surgery was finally complete, Elena sat beside Kale's bed and watched his chest rise and fall with the help of his new mechanical lungs. He looked so small lying there, wrapped in bandages and connected to machines. And she thought about the pack that had walked away from him without looking back. She did not understand how anyone could do that. She did not want to understand. All she knew was that this cub was going to live. And someday he was going to walk again. And the people who had left him to die were going to have to look at what they had thrown away. Kale's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and confused. And Elena took his paw in her hand. "Rest now," she said softly. "You are safe here, and no one is going to leave you behind again. I promise." Kale's eyes closed, and for the first time since the rock slide, his breathing was steady and peaceful outside. The twin suns rose over the colony, bringing a new day and a new beginning that no one had expected. 3 months had passed since the night the humans had pulled Kale from the rubble. And in that time he had learned many things about his new body. He had learned that his legs were no longer made of bone and muscle, but of metal and synthetic fiber that responded to signals from his brain through tiny machines embedded in his spine. He had learned that his lungs were not really lungs anymore, but complex filters that pulled oxygen from the air more efficiently than his natural organs ever had. And he had learned that in the eyes of his people, these changes made him something worse than dead. Vethrani called such creatures hollow, beings who existed outside the natural order, who should have returned to the stars, but instead lingered in bodies that were no longer truly their own. Kale had heard the word whispered by the Vethrani workers who passed the human medical facility, had seen the way they looked at the windows as if afraid that whatever curse had fallen upon him might somehow spread to them. He was an abomination now, a walking violation of everything his people believed. And the shame of it burned in his chest like a fire that would not go out. So he stopped talking. He stopped eating unless the doctors forced nutrition into him through tubes, and when the human therapists came to help him learn to use his new legs, he refused to cooperate. Lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling with empty golden eyes, Elena tried everything she could think of to reach him, bringing him his favorite foods from the colony's Vethrani restaurant, reading him stories from human literature, sitting with him in silence when words seemed pointless. Nothing worked. "He is giving up," she told Marcus one evening, her voice heavy with exhaustion and frustration. "I saved his body, but I am losing his spirit." Marcus nodded slowly, his scarred face thoughtful. "Maybe he does not need a doctor right now," he said. "Maybe he needs a friend." The next morning, a human girl appeared in Kale's doorway. She was about 12 years old, with dark skin and hair that she wore in dozens of small braids decorated with colorful beads. And she moved with a strange, mechanical grace that made Kale's ears perk up despite himself. "So you are the famous wolf boy," she said, rolling into his room in a chair that moved on its own. "I am Jamie, and I heard you have been giving the doctors a hard time." Kale turned his head away and said nothing. Jamie did not seem bothered by his silence. She simply rolled her chair right up to his bed and looked at him with bright, curious eyes. "My legs do not work either," she said casually. "Shuttle crash when I was 8. Crushed my spine pretty bad. The doctors gave me these instead." She lifted the blanket that covered her legs, and Cale saw metal and synthetic muscle that looked very similar to his own new limbs. "Took me forever to learn how to use them," Jamie continued. "I fell down about 1,000,000 times, and I cried a lot. And I told my mom I wanted to die because I would never be normal again." Cale's ears flattened against his skull, and despite his determination to stay silent, the words escaped him before he could stop them. "What did she say?" Jamie grinned, revealing a gap between her front teeth. "She said normal is boring, and that I should try being amazing instead." Cale stared at her, not understanding. "But you are broken," he said. "Like me, your legs are not real, and your body is not whole." "My legs work just fine," Jamie replied, her grin fading into something more serious. "They are different, sure, but different does not mean broken. Watch this." She stood up from her chair, her mechanical legs humming softly. And then she did something that made Cale's eyes go wide with shock. She jumped, not just a small hop, but a real jump, launching herself into the air and landing gracefully on the other side of the room. "My new legs are actually better than my old ones in a lot of ways," she said, walking back toward him with easy confidence. "I can run faster, jump higher, and I never get tired. Not bad for a broken girl, right?" Cale was silent for a long moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Among my people," he said finally, "you would be hollow, a ghost, something that should not exist." "Yeah, well, among my people, you would be a survivor," Jamie replied. "Someone who went through something terrible and came out the other side. That is what we call a hero." She sat back down in her chair and leaned forward, her dark eyes meeting his golden ones. "I know you think your life is over," she said. "I thought the same thing when I woke up and found out I could not feel my legs anymore. But here is the thing. Your life is not over. It is just different. How can you understand?" Cale asked, and there was a crack in his voice that he could not hide. "Your people did not leave you to die. Your mother did not walk away." Jamie's expression softened, and for a moment she looked much older than her 12 years. "No, they did not," she admitted. "And I am sorry that happened to you. It was wrong, and you did not deserve it. But you know what? You have got new people now, people who fought to keep you alive. And that has to count for something." She reached out and took his paw in her small brown hand. "Give us a chance," she said. "Let me teach you how to walk again, and maybe, if you are lucky, I will even teach you how to dance." Cale looked at her hand wrapped around his paw. That's so small and fragile compared to his claws. And he felt something shift inside his chest. It was not happiness, not yet. But it was something close to hope. "I do not know how to dance," he said quietly. Jamie laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Neither did I before the crash," she said. "But that is the best part about starting over. You get to learn everything all over again. And this time you can choose who you want to be." Over the following weeks, Jamie became Cale's constant companion, showing up every morning to drag him out of bed and push him through exercises that left his new legs aching and his spirit slowly healing. She was relentless in her encouragement, refusing to let him feel sorry for himself, making jokes when he fell and celebrating wildly when he took even a single step. She told him about human history, about how her people had once been just as brutal as the Vethrani, leaving their sick and wounded to die in the wilderness because they could not afford to care for them. "But we changed," she said one afternoon as they sat together in the rehabilitation garden. "We decided that just because someone could not hunt or fight or work did not mean they did not deserve to live. We built medicine and machines and whole systems just to take care of each other." "Why?" Cale asked, Genuinely curious. It seems wasteful. Jamie shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Maybe it is, she said, but we like to think it is what makes us human. We do not leave people behind, even when it would be easier. Because we decided that every life is worth fighting for. Cale thought about his pack, about his mother, about the howl that had marked him as dead while he was still breathing, and he thought about Elena, who had worked through the night to save him, about Marcus, who had carried him to safety, about Jamie, who refused to let him give up. I want to walk, he said suddenly. I want to learn, not for them, not for the pack that left me, but for me. Jamie's grin was like the sunrise. Now we are talking 2 weeks later. Cale took his first real steps on his new legs, and Jamie was there beside him, holding his paw as he stumbled and steadied, and finally walked across the room on his own. Elena watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and when Cale looked at her, she smiled. I knew you could do it, she said. Cale looked down at his metal legs, at the body that was no longer purely Vethrani, but something new, something different, and for the first time since the rock slide, he did not feel like an abomination. He felt like a survivor. 6 months had passed since the humans had pulled Cale from the rubble, and word of his survival had spread through the Vethrani settlements like wildfire through dry grass, the dead cub walks. They whispered in the markets and the mining camps and the quiet corners where gossip lived, and Gru the Hollow One lives among the humans. They said, his body more machine than flesh. An insult to the ancestors, and a violation of the sacred laws. Cale knew the whispers were coming, had been preparing himself for this moment ever since he had learned to walk on his new legs. But knowing did not make it easier. The confrontation came on a bright morning in the central plaza of the colony, where humans and Vethrani gathered to trade goods and share news. Cale was walking with Jamie, enjoying the warm sunlight on his fur and the steady rhythm of his mechanical legs beneath him, when he heard the familiar sound of Vethrani boots on Stonepack. Alpha Varth stood at the edge of the plaza, flanked by a dozen warriors with weapons at their sides and cold fury in their eyes behind them, watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disgust. Stood more members of the pack, including Setha, whose golden eyes found Cale's face and then quickly looked away. There he is, Morith growled, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent plaza. The ghost who refuses to die. Cale felt his heart racing, felt the old fear rising in his throat. But he forced himself to stand tall and meet the Alpha's gaze. I am no ghost, he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. I am Cale, son of Setha, and I am very much alive. Vorath stalked forward, his massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed Cale whole. You are nothing, the Alpha spat. You were released according to the ancient laws, marked as dead by the right. Whatever walks in your body now is an abomination, a thing that should not exist. And yet I do exist, Cale replied. The humans saved me, healed me, gave me legs that work and lungs that breathe. They did what you would not. A murmur ran through the crowd of Vethrani, and Cale saw shock on some faces and anger on others. No one spoke to the Alpha this way, especially not a cub, especially not a Hollow Var's lips pulled back to reveal his massive teeth, and his voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. You will come with us, Ghost, he said. You will face judgment before the Pack Council for your crime of defying the release. He is not going anywhere with you. The voice came from behind Cale, and he turned to see Colonial Director Samuel Assay stepping forward, flanked by Marcus Cole and a squad of Human Marines. Director Assay was a tall man with gray at his temples and the calm, unshakable presence of someone who had faced far worse than angry wolves. This young man has claimed asylum under the Colonial Protection Act, Assay continued. He is under our jurisdiction now, and we do not recognize any law that condemns children to death for the crime of being injured." Vorith's ears flattened against his skull, and his warriors tensed behind him. "You have no right to interfere in Vethrani affairs," the Alpha growled. "He is our blood, our property. People are not property," Asay replied, his voice firm but calm. "And Kale is no longer just Vethrani. He has been adopted into our community, protected by our laws. And I will not hand him over to be punished for surviving." Kale watched this exchange with something like wonder growing in his chest. These humans, these strange creatures who had no claws and no fangs and no natural weapons at all, were standing between him and the most powerful warrior his people had ever known. And they were not backing down. "You would risk war between our peoples for the sake of one worthless cub?" Vorith demanded. Marcus Cole stepped forward, his scarred face set in hard lines, and though he did not raise his weapon, his stance made it clear that he was ready for whatever came next. "We would risk everything for the sake of one child," Marcus said. "That is what humans do, Alpha. We do not leave people behind, not ever. And that boy is one of ours now." The plaza was silent, except for the wind and the distant hum of machinery. Kale saw uncertainty flicker across Vorith's face, saw the Alpha calculating the cost of pressing further against these stubborn, impossible creatures who seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses. Then Kale stepped forward, moving between the humans and the Vethrani, his metal legs carrying him steady and sure. "You left me to die," he said to Vorith, and his voice carried across the plaza for all to hear. "You performed the rite while I was still breathing, still hoping, still believing that someone would come back for me." He turned to look at his mother, who still would not meet his eyes. "You walked away," he said to her. "I watched you leave, and I waited alone in the dark for death to find me." Setha's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her furred cheeks. But still she said nothing. Kale turned back to Vorith, and when he spoke again, his voice was not angry or bitter or sad. It was simply true. "You taught me that the wounded are burdens, that the weak must be released so the strong can survive," he said. "But the humans taught me something different. They taught me that strength is not about what you can do for the pack. It is about what you choose to do for each other." He lifted one of his mechanical legs, the metal gleaming in the sunlight. "I am not hollow," he said. "I am not an abomination. I am Kale, and I am alive because someone decided I was worth saving, not because I was useful, not because I was strong, but because I was a child who needed help." He looked around the plaza at the gathered crowd of humans and Vethrani, and he saw something shifting in the eyes of his people. Not acceptance, not yet, but something like doubt, a crack in the foundation of everything they had believed. "You call me a ghost," Kale continued, "but I think maybe it is the old laws that are dead. Maybe it is time for our people to learn what the humans learned long ago, that mercy is not weakness, and that no one has to die alone." Vorith stood frozen, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. And for a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Alpha turned to his warriors and made a sharp gesture with his head. "We are leaving," he growled. "This matter is not finished, but it will not be settled today." As the Vethrani pack turned to go, Setha hesitated, her eyes finally meeting Kale's across the distance between them. There was grief in those eyes, and guilt, and something that might have been pride, or might have been sorrow, or might have been both at once. "My son," she whispered, so softly that Kale barely heard it. Then she turned and followed the pack. And Kale watched her go with an ache in his chest that no surgery could ever heal. Jamie appeared at his side, her small hand finding his paw. And she did not say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. Elena put a hand on his shoulder, and Marcus nodded at him with something like respect. These were his people now, not the pack that had left him to die, but the humans who had refused to let him go. Kale looked up at the twin suns, bright and warm against the alien sky, and he thought about the future stretching out before him like an unwritten story. He did not know what that future would hold. Did not know if his people would ever accept him, or if his mother would ever ask for forgiveness, but he knew that he was not alone. And for now, that was enough. 1 year had passed since the day Kale had stood in the plaza and faced down the Alpha who had left him to die. And in that time, everything had changed. He had become something new, not quite Vethrani, not quite human, but a bridge between two worlds that had never really understood each other. During the day, he worked with Elena in the medical facility, teaching human doctors about Vethrani physiology and helping them develop treatments that could save lives without violating too many ancient traditions at night. He would sometimes slip away to the edges of the Vethrani settlement, where other wounded members of his people would come to him in secret, asking about the human medicines that could heal what nature could know, never turned anyone away. The plague arrived with the spring rains, a wasting disease that moved through the Vethrani settlements like a shadow, leaving paralysis and slow death in its wake. At first, the pack councils tried to handle it according to the old ways, performing the rite of release for those who fell sick and hoping the disease would burn itself out before it took too many lives. But the disease did not care about the old ways. It spread through families and work crews and hunting parties, striking down the young and the old with equal cruelty. And soon the howls of release were echoing across the colony every night like a chorus of grief. Elena came to Kale with the news that Pack Alpha Varath himself had fallen ill. His council is preparing the rite, she said, her face troubled. They expect him to be dead within a week. Kale stood at the window of the medical facility, looking out toward the distant lights of the Vethrani settlement, and he felt something strange and complicated moving in his chest. Morath had left him to Deverth, had called him an abomination, a ghost, a thing that should not exist, and now Varath was the one waiting for death to find him. I need to go there, Kale said. Elena looked at him with surprise and concern. Kale, they may not welcome you, she warned. The last time you saw Varath, he wanted to drag you back for judgment. I know, Kale replied, but I also know what it feels like to lie in the dark, waiting for the end, believing that no one is coming. I would not wish that on anyone, not even him. He gathered a medical team, Elena, 2 human nurses, and a transport full of supplies, and they drove through the night toward the Vethrani settlement. The guards at the entrance tried to stop them, their weapons raised and their faces hostile. But Kale stepped forward and spoke in the ancient tongue of his people. I am Kale, son of Setha, he said, and I am here to offer help to my people in their time of need. You may turn me away if you wish, but first look at your sick and your dying and ask yourself if your pride is worth their lives. The guards hesitated, looking at each other with uncertainty, and then one of them stepped aside and let them pass. The settlement was quiet and dark, the streets empty except for the occasional figure hurrying between buildings with cloth masks covering their muzzles. Kale led his team to the Alpha's quarters, a large stone building at the center of the settlement, and pushed open the door without waiting for permission. Varath lay on a bed of furs, his once powerful body wasted and thin, his breathing shallow and labored. The Alpha's eyes opened as Kale approached, and for a moment there was a flash of the old anger and contempt. You, Varath rasped. The ghost comes to watch me die. I come to offer you a choice, Kale replied, kneeling beside the bed so that he was at eye level with the dying Alpha. The humans have developed a treatment for this disease. It will not be perfect, and you may need some of their machines to help you breathe afterward. But you will live. Varath's lip curled in disgust. You want me to become like you? He asked, a hollow thing more metal than flesh? I want you to live, Kale said simply. What you become after that is up to you. The Alpha was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes searching Kale's face for some sign of mockery or revenge, but there was none. There was only the calm, steady gaze of a young Vethrani who had walked through death and come out the other side with something the old laws had never taught: compassion for those who did not deserve it. "Why?" Voreth asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you save me after what I did to you?" Cale thought about the question, thought about all the nights he had spent alone and afraid, and wondering if his mother had really loved him at all. "Because giving up on people is easy," he said. "Fighting for them is hard. And I have learned that hard things are usually worth doing." Voreth closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with something that might have been grief. "I am too old to change," he said. "Too set in the old ways to become something new. But you are the future, Cale, and perhaps that is not such a terrible thing." He opened his eyes and looked at the human medical team waiting in the doorway. "Save my people," he said. "I will not take your treatment for myself. I have lived long enough. And the stars are waiting, but save the others. The young ones who still have time to learn a new way." Cale wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Voreth could still be saved. But he saw the peace in the old Alpha's eyes and understood that some choices were not his to make. "I will," he promised over the following days. Cale and the human medical team worked without rest, treating every Vethrani who would accept their help. Cubs with broken bodies were mended with synthetic bone and artificial muscle elders, with failing organs received implants that gave them years instead of days. Warriors who had lost limbs in the plagues, violent seizures were fitted with prosthetics that made them stronger than they had ever been, and slowly, the howls of release grew quiet, replaced by something that the Vethrani had never heard before. The sounds of Hapizitha found Cale on the third night, when he was resting alone outside the medical tent. Watching the stars wheel overhead, she stood at a distance at first, uncertain and afraid, and Cale could see that she had been crying. "My son," she said, and her voice broke on the words. Cale rose and turned to face her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I have thought about what I would say to you every day since the rock slide," Setha finally continued. "I have written speeches in my head, practiced apologies that never seemed like enough, tried to find the words that would make you understand." She took a step closer, and Cale could see her paws trembling. "But there are no words," she said. "There is no excuse for what I did. I left my child to die alone because I was afraid, because I was weak, because I believed in laws that were never worth your life." Tears streamed down her face, matting the fur on her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry, and I know that sorry is not enough. And I know you may never forgive me, but I needed you to know that I have regretted that moment every second of every day since I walked away." Cale looked at his mother, at the grief and shame that had been eating her alive for a year, and he felt the wall he had built around his heart begin to crack. He thought about Jamie, who had taught him that broken things could be made whole again. He thought about Elena, who had refused to give up on him, even when he had given up on himself. He thought about what it meant to be human, really human, in the way that mattered, and he realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing to move forward anyway. He stepped toward his mother and wrapped his arms around her, and she collapsed against him with a sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "I do not forgive you yet," he said quietly. "I may not forgive you for a long time, but I am still your son, and you are still my mother. And that is a beginning." Voreth died 3 days later, slipping away quietly in the night with a peace on his face that no one had ever seen before. But before he passed, he summoned Cale to his bedside one last time. "I have something to give you," the old Alpha said, his voice barely audible. "A blessing. If you will accept it." Cale knelt beside him and listened as Voreth spoke the words that would change everything. "I give my blessing to the right of intervention," Voreth said. A new law that allows any sapient being to claim protection for the abandoned. Let it be known that from this day forward, the right of release is a choice, not a command, and that no one may be left to die if another is willing to fight for their life. He reached out and took Kale's paw in his trembling grip. Perhaps the humans understand something we forgot, he whispered. That strength is not only in survival, but in what we carry with us. Then his eyes closed, and he was gone. Kale stood in the center of the settlement the next morning, surrounded by Vethrani and humans who had come together to honor the fallen and celebrate the survivors. He spoke of the old Alpha and his final gift, of the new law that would change everything, of a future where no one would have to die alone. And when he looked out at the crowd, at Jamie grinning beside him, at Elena wiping tears from her eyes, at his mother standing tall for the first time in a year, he knew that everything he had suffered had led to this moment. He was Kale, son of Setha, bridge between two worlds. He was survivor and healer, advocate and friend. He was scarred and rebuilt, broken and made whole, and somewhere in the distance, the twin suns were rising over a colony where the old ways were dying and something new was being born, something built on a simple, stubborn human truth that the galaxy had never quite understood. We carry each other, always.